Hello, I'm Jeffrey Sachs, University Professor at Columbia University and Director of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Welcome to this new course on work and employment. This is a course about the place of work in sustainable development. It's about the concept of decent work and how decent work can be attained all over the world. What we need to do in public policy, in rule of law, in economic strategy to ensure that people have meaningful work, a high quality of work life, a good work-life balance, and the opportunities of good skills and a good education to give all of that possibility of meaningful work. Work is at the core of an economy, and therefore it is a core part of achieving sustainable development. Sustainable development means an economy that is prosperous, that is socially inclusive, and that is environmentally sustainable. As you know, all 193 member states of the United Nations agreed in September 2015 to 17 Sustainable Development Goals as a framework of cooperation and as guideposts for national policies to achieve sustainable development around the world. One of the key Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 8, focuses on decent work for all. That's the focus of this course. It's important to put SDG 8 in context. Decent work for all, meaning work that provides a meaningful life and remuneration and security economically for households, is related to all of the rest of the Sustainable Development Goals. Success in achieving decent work for all also will mean success in achieving SDG 1, ending extreme poverty, success in SDG 2, ending hunger, because with adequate incomes and social protection, hunger too, of course, can be eliminated. SDG 4 is fundamentally related to our theme because SDG 4 calls for quality education for all children around the world. Education is essential for being able to have decent work, to have the skills that will be needed in the 21st century global economy. SDG 5, gender equality, is obviously also intrinsically related to the theme of decent work for all, because the challenge of ensuring that young women have the same access as young men to new jobs as they leave school, have the same access to education, have the same ability to rise in business and become business leaders, is core to SDG 5. SDG 9, which calls for an innovative economy, depends on a skilled workforce. So it too is strongly related to the themes of this course. And SDG 10, an absolutely central theme of sustainable development, calls on all societies to reduce inequalities of income and wealth. And that too relates to the ability of every person in the society to find meaningful, decent work and employment, to have the social protection and the access to social services that they need in order that inequalities don't widen and in fact are brought down as countries have agreed in SDG 10. So the theme of our course on work and employment is a theme that absolutely is part of every aspect of sustainable development. Now, what are the actual goals that were adopted by the member states in SDG 8, calling for decent work for all. There are several specific targets that I would like us to pay attention to throughout this course. In particular, SDG target 8.5, one of the targets of the overall goal number 8 is that by 2030, the world should achieve full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men, including for young people and persons with disability, and equal pay for work of equal value. SDG target 8.6 calls on the world by 2020 to substantially reduce the proportion of youth that is not in employment, education, or training. In other words, young people that are out of school but haven't successfully made a transition either to further training or to meaningful, decent work. SDG target 8.7, very crucial and really stunning that we need this target, but we urgently do, calls on countries to take immediate and effective measures to eradicate forced labor, end modern slavery and human trafficking, and secure the prohibition and elimination of the worst forms of child labor. We have slaves in this world, slave labor in the 21st century. We have many people in forced labor, and of course there is terrible human trafficking. So SDG 8.7 calls on the world to end these terrible scourges, these crimes against humanity. SDG target 8.8 calls on all countries to protect labor rights and to promote safe and secure working environments for all workers, including migrant workers, and in particular women migrants and those in precarious employment. The point is that decent work has many dimensions. When we speak about decent work for all, we're talking about a framework of how people can relate to their jobs, their employment, in conditions of dignity, of safety, of income security, and of personal security. Well, this concept of decent work for all goes back decades. Indeed, the idea that every adult on the planet should have this guarantee of decent work is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the so-called Moral Charter of the United Nations that was adopted by the UN member states in 1948. And it's worth noting that Article 23 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says everyone has the right to work, to the free choice of employment, and to favorable conditions of work. Everyone, without discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. Everyone who has the right to just and favorable remuneration. In other words, to be able to support him or herself and family, and also to the necessary means of social protection. And Article 23 says that everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his or her interests. So this idea of decent work for all has a long tradition. It is core to the Moral Charter of the United Nations itself, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and through the wonderful leadership of the International Labor Organization, ILO. Decent work has become a well-defined and a well-measured concept, so that when we have this goal in SDG 8, we can meaningfully and specifically direct attention to the needs, to the shortcomings, and to the areas where countries need to take actions for specific improvement. There are many dimensions of decent work that we'll be discussing in this course, and I want to mention several of them at the outset. The first is the basic question of those who are seeking work able to find work, being able to find work. That is the question of people being able to avoid involuntary unemployment. We know that when economic crises came, such as the Great Depression of the 1930s or the Great Recession of 2008 onward, many people lose jobs and cannot find gainful employment. The consequences are often devastating. Of course, devastating to the point of loss of life, chronic illness, depression, impoverishment of families, and many, many other harms. So the first point of decent work for all is the actual ability to find work and to take measures, macroeconomic and microeconomic measures, to avoid or to combat mass unemployment. The second dimension of decent work is decent earnings, adequate earnings that enable a worker to be able to support him or herself and their family. And this is a core topic of our course because there are dramatic changes in market earnings taking place depending on skills, education, geography that are causing great disruptions and great stress in the ability of people to meet their basic needs through their labor market earnings. A third dimension of decent work is a decent balance of work and non-work life. This means the access to family leave with a newborn, both for maternal leave time and father's leave time. It means adequate vacation time. It means that work hours in the course of a week or a month should be on a humane and decent basis. Another dimension of decent work is the stability and security of work. Do workers have rights to be notified of job losses in advance? What kinds of securities do they have if they lose jobs? Are there severance payments or social adjustment provisions in place to help workers between jobs if they do experience a job loss? Another dimension of decent work is the physical environment, worker safety, worker health, and the overall conditions of stress or physical exertion that attend to a particular job. Of course, workers are killed and injured by dangerous, hazardous work that should not exist at all, or that should be dramatically regulated to prevent these disasters. Workers have rights, but those rights are often overlooked or treated with absolute disrespect. Another dimension of decent work is social security. Many people have disabilities which prevent them from gainful employment. Of course, older workers need social protection. Newborns and young children, children of school age, need protection, and if their families are impoverished, the children face hardships that can then last throughout a lifetime or even claim their lives prematurely. So social protection is another core dimension of decent work for vulnerable groups. Another aspect of decent work are the rights of workers at work. It is a core proposition of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is a core ILO globally adopted standard that workers have the rights of free association. They have the rights to form unions, though, of course, this is governed by national laws, and often those laws are highly repressive. People everywhere have the right not to be forced into bonded or slave labor, and yet such forced labor exists in many parts of the world. Children have the right to a childhood in which they can go to school and grow up healthy and not be forced into child labor by reason of their poverty or their exploitation by adults. Ending child labor is a core proposition of SDG 8. And people have the right to be treated fairly in the workforce, to equal pay for equal work, whether by gender or for minorities in the workforce or for others who face discrimination for other reasons. SDG 8, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, ILO work standards, and the concept of decent work itself call for the end of this kind of discrimination. One more dimension of decent work that is extremely important is governance of the workplace. Workers have the right to be heard, to participate in discussions and deliberations about the nature of the work, the safety of the work environment. Workers have the right to associate, to form unions, and to share in the governance of the workplace itself. Social dialogue between owners or managers and workers, worker representation in the boards of companies or in processes such as Germany's co-determination are another dimension of decent work. You can see that we're discussing a very broad range of concepts when we talk about decent work for all. The ability to find work, proper remuneration, the safety of the workplace, the fairness of the workplace, the voice of workers at the workplace, the social protection for those who are unable for one reason or another by virtue of disability or age or some other reason to be unable to participate in the workforce. All of this is envisioned in Sustainable Development Goal 8 and related SDGs, especially social protection under SDG 1, the end of poverty. And all of this is core to the topic of this course.